Hello, lovely Twitch audience. I'm Juliet Burton, and we are researching Hopepunk, which is a new project which is Arts Council funded. Thank you very much, Arts Council England. They are funding my research and development for a show that I'm creating, which was originally all about how to find hope when things seem hopeless. But then things happened, and life taught me that hope isn't necessarily what I thought it was. And this research for this show has really taken me down some new avenues. So, in light of that, I'm very excited to introduce my guest for this particular research interview, which we're doing on Twitch and YouTube. If you're watching live, welcome. You are a Hope Punk. That is what we're doing. We're creating a community of Hope Punks. And if you're watching in the future, this recording is sometime in the future, then you are also a Hope Punk. Welcome again somehow in the future. But today, my interview is with the wonderful SK Shlomo. Hey, Shlo.
Hello, hello, hello. How are you, wonderful Juliet Burton?
Oh, I'm enjoying the fact that you and I have spent some time together recently, and I'm good. I'm actually really good today. How are you doing?
I'm good. This feels sort of almost a little bit retro because I did a live stream on Twitch and YouTube every single week for a whole year during lockdown, and then literally in July when they opened things back up, I was like, guys, I'm taking a little break because I've got to go and do some touring, and I haven't done a single stream since because I did it every Thursday, and I think I've had something on like in real life every Thursday. So this is kind of lovely just to like come back to all of this, plugging in some live streamy type stuff. I'm excited.
It also feels quite old school to me because you and I met on a virtual show.
Right?
We were
That's
both
it.
performing, was it May 2020, which was 100 years ago.
It was a
Um,
different world, wasn't it? Back when, yeah, it was like in movies and stuff when everything
you can
changes.
tell the
It's like
story.
that.
So can you tell our lovely viewers and remind me how did we meet? What was it that we met on?
So I already knew about your badass work from you being a mental health champion and brilliant Edinburgh comedian. But then I was asked to be part of a Zoom gig called What's Going On in Your Head, What's Going On Inside Your Head, which is a wonderful kind of mental health community that do a monthly gig with spoken word, poetry, music, comedy, and that normally happens in London. And it's just started up again in London, which is very cool. But during lockdown, they did Zoom, and that was my very first sort of Zoom gig, my very first ever online gig where you could see the crowd, and it was a big moment for me because it really it like May, what did you say, May 2020. So we'd been isolating for like months by then, and it was horrible. We hadn't seen anyone, and I was on tour when the pandemic kicked in, so I'd gone from, you know, making people scream every day on tour to like having no interaction with other humans. So then to perform and watch everyone in their living rooms, like including yourself, kind of jumping around, it made me actually cry, and it really, really made me focus for the rest of lockdown. Like from that point forward, I was like, right, I am going to be an online performer for the foreseeable, and I just really embraced that and did as much as I could with that. So it was a good moment, and then we got to connect. Did you do a set on that one, or was it another one? I remember watching you do a
I
set.
did a set. I did a set because I remember you complimenting one of my jokes and referring to it when you were introducing your set, and I thought, I like this guy. He likes my jokes. I like him.
He's paying
That's how.
attention.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's it. Like this is what it's about, right? Connecting. Like you can really focus on so many different metrics if you're an artist. It's like, oh, especially with social media and like how many people like you and follow you and tune into your Twitch streams. But really, it's
Mm-hmm.
about connection. So if you connect with one human, you've done something really like the most powerful thing there is to do, and then the rest of it's secondary, right?
Absolutely. And that leads me into our interview today, which I'm very excited by because, yeah, we're going to be covering a few different topics. And like for this is also research for this show that will be work in progressing early in 2022, and then moving into hopefully something more. We'll see what happens.
Is that
Um,
is that Hopepunk? Is that the name of the show?
Hopepunk,
Or,
that's
yeah,
yeah, that's the name of
wicked.
the show. So that's the one thing that hasn't changed about the show since I came up with the idea a very long time ago, is the name, but everything else has changed because originally it was just meant to be about the nature of hope and like
Mm,
finding light in the darkness, which is the one of the jokes that you referenced when we did that virtual show. Um, and then it's now kind of morphed into the fact that we've all been through this collective trauma of the pandemic, and
mm,
how do we recover from trauma, which has led me more down the path of I've been banging on Shlo for years about mental illness, but was
mm,
that just me hiding behind my mental illnesses and my mental health
mm,
diagnoses? Was I actually ever recovering from them? And I honestly, at the
mm,
moment, I don't think I was recovering. I think I was just saying, right, well, this is my story, that's my narrative, look at that. Don't look
mm.
behind it, because
Yeah.
behind it I'm hiding still. So that's part of what I'm trying to explore here, is looking a bit deeper about recovery, and properly how do we recover from the collective trauma that we've all experienced, and from our own personal traumas, and from mental illnesses, and how do we do that with healthy boundaries, like how, and as performers as well, which is something I want to ask you about, is performing a help or a hindrance? That's not the first
Mm.
question I'm going to ask. We're going to come on
Okay.
to all of that wealth of stuff, because the most important thing that we have to do right now, speaking of connection, is that I see that we've got some amazing people already tuning in, which is, of course, Baldy3. Baldy3, thank you so much for joining us.
What's up,
And
Baldy?
Baldy is awesome. And we are going to have Alex Watson, our amazing Twitch producer, here as well. Thank you so much for being a part of this, Alex, as
Hi,
well.
Alex.
Um, so I'm going to do my little, so on our social media channels, we've been, thank you very much to our live producer as well, Susanna, who has been helping me manage my boundaries with social media. So I've been trying to take a break from social media to really focus on making progress in my authentic recovery from mental illnesses and from the pandemic. And
Mm,
so Susanna has taken charge of social media push, which I'm very
mm,
grateful for. So Susanna has said, as Shlomo, he burst into the mainstream, collaborating with Bjork, and played the main stages at Glastonbury more times than he remembers.
mm,
But staying on top becomes increasingly tricky to maintain. Diagnosed with PTSD, hello, he was forced to confront his past, saying, talking about a major trauma from my childhood was a huge turning point. His album release was the catalyst for SK Shlomo's return to performing after almost 2 years off the road fighting depression, and the comeback was hailed as a triumph. So I feel like that's probably a place to jump in at. Let's jump in at the deep end. I want to know more, because we've hung out a few times recently in actual real life 3-dimensional person.
so good.
It was really good. Like, karaoke is so good after the
Oh
pandemic.
my God. Karaoke
Ah,
is life.
it's. I mean, genuinely, can we both jump on a train after this and just
Mm-hmm.
go, and we can take our Twitch viewers as well with us and just head off to the karaoke bar. Um, so look, uh, it's a big one to go in on, but this childhood trauma, I haven't asked you about it in
Mm,
person before.
mm,
And apparently it was a big turning point for you. So
mm.
what what was going on for you? What happened?
Well, I was around 4 years old, and I had some stomach pains, and I went to the doctors, and they sent me back home. They said it's nothing to worry about, um, and I didn't tell anyone after that that they were getting worse, because the doctor had said there were nothing to worry about, and I didn't want anyone to worry because I was very small. But yeah, I kind of kept it secret, and then there was a moment where I couldn't do anything at all. The pain had got so bad that I actually couldn't get help. I couldn't speak or scream, um, and that's kind of the last memory I have of that. I was like at the top of the stairs trying to get anyone's attention, and the next memory I have is waking up in hospital after having had an operation for what's called an intercystectomy. So basically the way they explained it to me as a kid is that my tummy had got in a knot, but it's a thing where your intestines, which are super delicate and super like really carefully placed inside you by evolution, but if they start to touch each other, they can start to sort of envelop each other, and it's extremely life-threatening. And if you don't have the operation, which is a very simple operation, they just kind of gently part them away from each other. But if you don't have that operation, yeah, children die. So that was really traumatic. And yeah, like that was sort of end of the 80s, when children did not get mental health support after a physical trauma. So I never really got to understand what had happened, and why. All I knew was if this ever came up in my family, my parents would go all gooey and weird and like hug me and be so grateful that I was alive, but I didn't really ever understand what had happened. And it's something that still now I'm kind of having breakthroughs with now, like waves of breakthrough. Like after I went to trauma therapy 4 years ago, so it's like been a 4-year process. But like still now I'm finding out a lot about it. Like I had this whole thing about responsibility. I always have had this whole thing about responsibility. So afterwards I was told how brave I was and how how strong I'd been. And I was terrified again. I was terrified that because I didn't have any memory of what had happened. So I didn't know how I'd somehow amazed everyone by surviving. And I kind of ended up walking around as a small child being terrified that it would happen again, but that everyone would expect me to be responsible again because I was last time, but I didn't know how I'd done it. So that's something that's really like, I'm 38 now. I'm finally kind of living the majority of my life. I'm now living out of fight or flight mode, out of adrenalized danger. But it's taken 34 years since the trauma for it to really to feel settled with it.
So much to ask. Firstly, thank you for sharing. And secondly, you talked about adrenalized fight or flight. Were you aware when you were in that before your trauma therapy, and how did it exhibit itself? How were you in fight or flight?
So I didn't know I was struggling with PTSD until I went and got therapy. So, and the reason I went and got therapy was because I had a real breakdown, and the reason I had the real breakdown is because I came off the road. So basically, to give you the full timeline, traumatic incident happened when I was about 4. Next few years, I was kind of lost and really grappling, not really understanding like what the world meant. A bunch of other stuff as well, like being, like encountering racism for the first time because I'm from an immigrant family, and just really wanting to just not exist for quite a long time until I found music. So then 8 years old I was when I got given a drum kit for my birthday, and then suddenly I had this identity that I could cope with. Did a concert did a solo at the school concert about a year after that, so like maybe 9 years old, and suddenly for the first time ever people at school like noticed me. I suddenly stopped being invisible, and I loved that feeling so much that became my everything. So from from the age of like 9 years old till the age of about 30, I just was obsessed with that. Like that was how I coped with the feeling of being on fight or flight, because it was something I could control. It was something that was supposed to make you adrenalized, like, and then the stakes got higher and higher. So I went from the school concert to, gigging in local bands to winning national beatboxing competitions, and then winning world competitions and performing on like the biggest stages there are in this country. And that's kind of not super sustainable. Like how often can you, like I broke the world record twice, like how like I never gave myself a break. I never gave myself praise. I always was like, no, go more, you have to keep going. And so yeah, that's what meant when I eventually did pause that crazed cycle of like of pushing myself because I wanted to make an album, I came off the road and I came out of that adrenaline cycle. Um, that's when I got really sick. Like like basically 30 years of grief suddenly caught up with me because I was sitting there trying to write songs and they were coming out in the songs and I had no breaks for that. And then I got really poorly. You know, with you know, I've talked about it really openly about how I got suicidal, like I wasn't well, and that's what led me to therapy, and that's what led me to the trauma diagnosis. And then that's even now it's unlocking way more. Like I've only just had a diagnosis for ADHD, which I was coping with all the way through that without knowing anything about that, and that's kind of something that's come out of therapy as well. So yeah,
Anyone who
there's
doesn't know
so
what
much.
ADHD is, like, could you give us a summary of what ADHD is?
ADHD is a disability that affects many, many people, especially creative people like yourself and myself, where it's ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And it means you find it so hard to concentrate and stay focused on a linear thought trail unless, and this is the key bit, unless it's something that you care about. So almost all ADHD people have a superpower, as well as colloquially called, but for me it was music. Like I can sit, they call it hyperfocus, so I can sit for literally days. Like I've had, like, one thing I've learned about taking care of myself is not to, like, I've to actually eat and urinate and sleep, because I can quite happily not just keep going until I collapse. So yeah, ADHD is huge, and talking about it has been huge as well. I do a lot. I tour a show for families, beatboxing adventures for kids, and I talk about all my strangers on that show, because I just feel like kids need to know about racism and about gender and about mental health. But yeah, the ADHD, like beatboxing, ADHD really go together. Let's put it that way.
I can imagine. Also, just as a little weird connection, I got
Yeah.
given a drum kit when I was 8 years old as well. Um,
Hey.
hey, it didn't turn into a beatboxing career for me.
Damn.
Yet,
It's never
I mean,
too late, Juliet Burton.
that's the thing. We can always discover new talents and new
I'll
skills.
swap techniques. If you teach me to be funny, I'll teach you to beatbox.
Let's make that happen. Again, we're gonna have to do that via karaoke, I'm sure. Um,
Definitely.
so I mean, the fight and flight thing. So do you think that crosses over? You said about the performing when you first got that kind of adrenaline rush of the anxiety went into it, just channeled into something that got you that external validation, and then it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Mm.
Um, there's so many questions I want to ask about that, because firstly, was that flight? Was that the flight and fight response? Was that one or the other or something else?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's like it's survival. So like, um, for anyone who's suffered trauma, you end up with this feeling of danger, uh, which is really really hard to understand because it's awful. And I've spoken to a lot of different people about it, because you have survived some genuine danger if you've had trauma, and then you've got to have your wits about you, and that, if you don't understand why that's happening, it's horrible. It's really really awful, and especially if you've not had the kind of emotional intelligence that our kids are getting taught now. Like I've got two kids, and it's wonderful the way that they get spoken to at school. It's very different how my generation was, where we did not talk about feelings. Adults did not ever show any kind of vulnerability. If you were scared, you were not you were not to share it. That would be the most dangerous thing to do. So for
I kept
me,
getting told it was a phase. You'll get out of it. It was always the thing.
that kills me. That absolutely kills me. Like, yeah, it's awful. So yeah, like that's how, if you've ever done a show, and I know you have, Juliet, like after you come off the stage, whether it was a good show or a bad show, you are adrenalized, you are rushing. There's like your whole body goes into this place. Like even just chatting with you now, like it's fun, it's exciting. So like there's a little bit of a buzz about it, and that, the serotonin kick, dopamine kick, and that's like super moreish, because it sort of normalizes that for a trauma survivor, it normalizes that feeling of danger because you've deliberately put yourself into a place of danger.
Mhm.
And it's either paid off, in which case you kind of feel good about it, or it's been a difficult show, in which case you've got a legit reason to feel like to feel like you do. And this is all stuff I never understood until really recently. And the psychology of performance is, and also the psychology of a crowd. Like, I'm absolutely fascinated by that. There's so many factors, so many variables that go into like what makes a crowd go crazy. And that's kind of my life's work. I love it, absolutely love it.
Oh, can you tell me more about that, please? Because I need to make crowds go crazy. I mean, not go crazy, because that's kind of what I'm trying to steer crowds away from in terms of mental health
Interesting.
recovery.
Yeah,
But you know what I mean.
crazy is a tricky word. Like, I kind of got told I shouldn't use words like that because they're ableist. Um,
No. I mean, well, I mean, sorry. I can't speak for the whole mental health community, but like, language is flexible and fluid, and
I
we're going to,
agree.
like, you and I have spoken about the word breakdown. Like, I need a different word for breakdown because it has such
Mm,
connotations. But then there's something about reclaiming it, like the schizophrenia community. For a while, there was a period where I was hearing a lot about people campaigning to rename the diagnosis schizophrenia because it was so stigmatized. But now I'm like, well, I think some people are trying to reclaim it. So language for crazy is an interesting word. I could take us down that route right now. How do you
mm.
feel about the word crazy?
I use it all the time. And but I mean, maybe it's okay for me to use language. I don't know. Maybe it's okay for me to use language that's related to mental illness, seeing as I've been treated for it. Like, it's part of my identity. I'm part of a community. I feel comfortable using it. Whereas if someone came up to me and said that I was crazy, uh, in the context of that being a criticism of my mental health, actually, that would probably be fine as well. I am a bit crazy. We all are. Like,
A few years ago, I was one of my first ever interviews as a kind of like, I'm a mental health advocate. I
mm,
didn't know how to handle it, and my friend Bernard O'Leary, who is lovely, was an amazing journalist when I met him.
mm,
He said that it's about intention,
mm-hmm.
information, and accountability. So
Nice.
yeah, and I like those because it's IIA, and it's like all the vowels. Well, not all the vowels, but two of the vowels, and one of them twice, which makes it even better. Um, yeah, intention, information, and
Information,
accountability. So
responsibility.
how informed are you? What is your intention with it, and how willing are you to be held accountable for what you've said?
Mm,
And that's how I've kind of approached every joke that I write about my mental health, is like, yeah, all of those three things. Does it pass that test? And
mm,
yeah, same with, I think, anyone using the word crazy or anything else related to mental illness.
yeah.
Or any like racism, misogyny, and any of the isms.
Mm,
Does it pass those three things? If you actually stop someone and say, "Excuse me, do you actually mean that?" Are you
mm,
willing to be held accountable for what you just said? Um, then it's quite often I have done that with people. I've done it anyway. That was a momentary memory, Shlo, of
mm,
when I had interviews for the first time. I was asking you about the word crazy, and I was asking you also about your experience with the flight response and getting a crowd going crazy, and the psychology of performance.
mm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, so at the moment, I've been working on this new project for next year, which is I'm so excited about. It's a solo theatre piece, and it's my second album all in one project, and it's all about rave. So it's a play that turns into a rave, and in part of the story, we look into what the word rave means, because in the story, it's a true story, but I'm stuck in this village, and my mental health has meant I can't leave this village, but I just really need
About
to
lockdown.
No, this is actually pre-lockdown. Um, yeah, but lockdown was another another version of it. But yeah, I kind of needed to connect, and I'm a raver. I always have been like that. That was a big coming of age thing for me, was going out raving. So the idea is like, well, how can you have a rave in a village? Can you have a rave in a living room? Like, and what does rave mean? And when we looked into like the etymology, of the origins of the word rave, it's about craze, about being crazed, and a kind of madness to it, from the French raver, which means to wander, to prowl kind of crazily. So then that's kind of the big climax of this piece that I'm writing at the moment, which is like, we all need a safe space to let that crazy out. And a rave gives us that. Like, anyone can, and a rave is a wide thing. Like that, you took me to swing dancing on Sunday. I'd never been swing dancing before. That counts as a rave to me. It's a safe space where you come together. It doesn't matter what color you are. Doesn't matter what gender you are. Doesn't matter like where you're from and what your disability is.
Or your age. You
Your
chatted for a
age.
really long time with David, who's in his 80s, and you guys look like you were properly bonding.
Yeah, man. Well, he's an original raver. He
He
was at
was.
the
He
first
is.
swing dances in East London in like the 40s, and I was like, oh my god, like
He's also a great lead. Whenever I dance with him, I know exactly what I'm doing.
I want to dance with him. I'm
You
tempted
can
to
dance with him.
learn follow steps next time. Anyway, I'm getting distracted, but yeah, the point is, like,
I'm distracting you.
it's really important that we provide ourselves with a space to just be mad. Like, if you don't be your mad self, if you pretend you're fine to yourself all the time,
Mm.
it will come back and bite your ass like it did to me. So let's just rave together. That's my philosophy.
So you said it came back to bite your ass. Was that when that grief, that overwhelm happened when you came off the road?
Yeah, yeah. Like I say,
When was that?
I think it was 2017 that I came off the road. Was it, or 16, around that time? Um, and it
And what sort of happened around that time? Like, what were the external influences, but how did it feel as well?
Well, there was a bunch of traumatic stuff happening unrelated in my personal life that involved being displaced from our home, and a series of really awful losses in our family, and it was just really already a difficult time. So then I'm displaced, and I've decided to cancel my touring so I can focus on the album. Um, and yeah, like the first 5 days, I was trying to write a track a day for a month. That was my idea, and then I'd have 30 kind of ideas to play with and to work with on the album. And in the first 5 days, I wrote 5 like bangers. It was sick. And then, in a very biblical sense, on the 6th day, I just showed up to the studio, and I just felt like I couldn't breathe. This is basically, and I know I've heard so many people talk about their mental health stories, but it's a panic attack. I didn't know that, but it was a panic attack. And yeah, that led to a very quick degradation of my well-being. Yeah, and I don't know. I think that's probably the first time I was able to admit that I was scared. Like, I tried therapy before that, like a decade before that. I'd gone to therapy because I'd noticed that my behavior wasn't healthy. Like, I was touring and drinking a lot, and I went to therapy, but it had a difficult experience with the therapist, and I did clean myself up. Like, I stopped drinking, so I've been clean and sober for 2008. What's it now?
Oh,
13
2021.
years. In
Yeah.
fact, it's going to be, I think, next week will be my 13 year. So I've been sober
Congratulations.
13 years. Thank you. And that was enough for me to like cope a bit better and not feel like I was going to fall off the end of the earth any minute.
Your
But it was
sobriety
still,
needs a bar mitzvah.
yeah, I need to have a little coming of age ceremony for my sobriety. That's a great idea.
Yeah, do
I'm going to do that. I'm going to write that idea down.
it. I wondered, you said that you had that panic attack,
Mm,
and you didn't know what it was, but you now know what it was. Can you
mm.
remember what that felt like?
It's when you can't breathe. Like, yeah, so much of all of this, I think, is connected to breathing. yeah, but it felt like
I've
I
got
couldn't
I've
breathe.
got a new breathing app on my phone that I highly recommend. A couple of
Have you?
them. So, yeah, Respirelax, which is all in French, which is great. But like it, you know what it means. And then Brainwaves, which is actually binaural beats, which is just like
Mm, I
binaural
love
beats.
all that.
Yeah. But yeah, and you said that you had a difficult experience in therapy at that time. Um,
Yeah, well, no, that was before. That was like a decade before when I sort of went to get help with addiction, and
right.
yeah, it's just some boundary stuff with the therapist because like what you know, they basically when they found out like that I was on TV a lot, they were like, "Oh, next time when you're on TV, I won't tell anyone how, but can I tell my friends that I know you?" And I was just like, that
Oh,
basically set me off on another panic attack. And again, I just still didn't even know that was panic attacks. But I just ran from therapy and didn't go back for like a decade because it just felt like such a violation. I now realize that's like a strikable offense. That's not okay. And therapists don't do that. That was a real strange and unlikely thing to happen to me, but it did.
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
I've had therapists ask if it's okay for them to come to my shows,
in a
but then I wouldn't.
supportive role,
Supportive role and educating themselves about what it is that we do,
that
which
makes sense.
I found really useful. However, my current therapist came to see me at one gig. Like I have lots of wonderful gigs, but this gig was one where it was fine, but it wasn't. You know, it's like that we constantly move the goalposts, right? And it was one that I was like, oh, that could have been so much better. And that was, but then that's probably useful for a therapist to see what that's like. And
What was it like performing when you knew your therapist was in the room?
I didn't know until she walked we until she walked out. That's
That was that bad.
that yeah.
It was so bad. My therapist had to leave.
Just like all our sessions. Oh, um,
You should do that in
yeah.
your show.
No, it was I always like to say goodbye to the audience on the way out, but I don't know
Mm.
why. A glutton for punishment. No, but I
Me
like it
too.
because I like that moment of like, hey, if you really enjoyed it and you want to make a proper connection, then let's properly connect for a moment, and
All
then let's
right.
put in some good boundaries. Um, then yeah, I didn't know she was there until that day, until that moment. But
Well, that's good that you didn't know when you're on stage.
yeah,
That
yeah,
could have messed with you a bit.
yeah. I can't remember what it's like being on stage shows. But yes, sorry. So there was. Oh, my lighting is going, so now you'll be able to have some kind of Halloween effect going on whilst we're chatting. Um, so you then got into therapy again with your when you had this moment of full on grief and this big life change.
Yeah.
Um,
So that was like, yeah, that was sort of around 2017.
mhm,
But what happened was I got some support from a brilliant charity called BAPAM, which is the British Association of Performing Arts Medicine. I mentioned that to you a few days ago, but
you
basically
did.
it meant that the therapy I've had in this last 4 years has all been performer specialist. So whereas my original therapist hadn't really ever met someone who was on TV, and that was weird. Whereas these specialist therapists know what our world is like and how different it is, and so like they wouldn't even look at my work unless I asked them to. They just have to treat you like a human, which I think is really, really helpful. Because sometimes I found people do get a bit weird once they've seen what I can do. Once I've blown their mind, they sometimes struggle to connect with me just as a normal kid rather
Yeah.
than
I
yeah.
understand. It's like when you saw me do Whitney Houston at karaoke, and it's like since then you've been really weird with me. Like
Uh, I feel like you might be joking, but that's legit. Like really shifted everything I feel about you, Juliet Burton.
yeah,
If you haven't ever heard Juliet sing, I don't know how many people have. Maybe it's something that very few people
I
have had the
think that was
pleasure. But
literally the first time,
oh
honestly.
my god, the way Juliet does Whitney,
Yeah, let's
yeah.
not invite all of our. Actually, there's not that many of them watching right now. Let's invite all of them to a karaoke room and let's all go do that. But
Oh,
yeah,
I thought it was just for me.
we're gonna do
I'm
it again for
special.
sure. Um, but yeah, so you now have a good relationship with your therapist, and you have that boundary that that you feel you can operate within. You have a safe, there's a phrase, safe enough
Yeah.
relationship.
God, yeah.
So, because you've been doing trauma therapy mainly
Yeah.
in Baldy 3 says he can't sing, so but you can
That's
come
the
and
whole point, Baldy 3. That's the way I love karaoke, because you don't have to, like, if even if
it's the
like if you do sing
enthusiasm.
good, it's a bit like, oh,
Yeah, but hang on, what are you saying about my Whitney?
nothing. Your Whitney was anyway.
Passionate.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's like, I mean, it's less when we do it, like, because when we did Whitney, we were in a private booth. But I'm talking about when you go like karaoke down the pub and everyone's having a good sing along, and then someone chooses a ballad and they try and sing with chops. You know, and the energy just goes down, because it's not really about you showing off as an individual and being
Yeah.
technically good. That's why I love it, because I really am insecure about my singing voice, and trying to do that in a professional space on a stage in front of people is, I find, really hard. Whereas karaoke, where it doesn't matter, I love that, because I can just sing out of tune and just be joyful.
Well,
So
let's see if I
Baldy,
can.
come and sing with us.
Yeah, do come and sing with us. Also, let's try to find a segue. I think there's something about boundaries with karaoke, of knowing yourself and knowing. Yeah, I'm trying to find some. So we've got knowing yourself, knowing your limitations, knowing what you're bringing to the table, knowing what you're looking for in this audience performer dynamic, even if it is karaoke, um, or whether it's at Edinburgh Fringe and your therapist is there coming to see it, and you are. Like, she did ask in advance whether that would be okay, and I was yes, that I'd welcome that. Or whether it's having a therapist who doesn't ask about that aspect of your life. It's those boundaries. Um, You've had trauma therapy. I would like to ask you what did that encompass when you say trauma therapy, and did that relate to boundaries in your career?
Yeah, that's like boundary work is like absolutely huge, because yeah, for a lot of trauma survivors or any kind of mental health patient or any human,
Mm,
boundaries can be such a difficult thing. But a lot of people who've dealt with trauma have terrible boundaries. They've not been taught them by their supposedly safe adults. It's not been modeled to them. They don't know where they're coming or going. A lot of people have had um, family situations that are bordering on or actually are abusive. So it's difficult for a lot of us with boundaries. So I didn't really understand um, how I was allowing myself to be hurt and also hurting other people. Some in some situations irreparably. So there's a lot of ways I've behaved that I'm really deeply ashamed of, and you know you gotta have to you've got to take a lot of strength to look at all these things and hold your hands up and say, I really have not been behaving in an okay way, but I could use the way I feel about this as a motivation to learn healthy boundaries, techniques, and scripts, and practice. It takes a lot of practice, like not to be terrified in a situation that makes you uncomfortable. But oh my gosh, this last few months for me have been huge in terms of like practicing boundaries in situations where it doesn't really matter is really, really helpful for them being well versed when it does. So, like, for example, the other day I just done my show, I was on tour, just done my show. I sat outside with a friend in Brighton, just having a meal and a really deep conversation. And then these two people arrived right next to us and asked if they could join the table. We were like, yeah, of course. But then they started getting really like up in our faces. And the old me would have found it really. The old me used to get smaller and shrink and feel really pained when I felt uncomfortable. But for me, having recently done some boundary work with people who really, really, really mean a huge amount to me, where the stakes were really, really high and had a lot to lose, it means that then when you're dealing with someone who isn't in your life, it's so much easier to just say outright, excuse me, the way you're behaving when you're saying things like that, I feel very uncomfortable. And that actually is feedback for the other person that they might not otherwise have got. And almost invariably it's met with, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I hadn't realized I've been making you uncomfortable, let me change that. And on the occasions when it isn't met with that, well, then it's still worth putting that boundary in place, because you now need to remove yourself from that situation. So I was all very much ready to just get up and leave that situation in a pub in Brighton. But actually, I didn't have to, because I just made it really clear that what was happening wasn't okay, and then what was happening stopped. So it's very, very, very empowering going to trauma therapy and becoming more confident and less. You know, you don't have to live in fight or flight. You can live in the now.
What did your trauma therapy involve? Like apart from boundary work, what else did it involve?
Well, I've had various different support. Um, a lot of it's just like week to week kind of work. So you're just like um, trying to process your life, because life's full of grief. I've, I've got this theory that every breath is a moment, right? You know, people, you know how they say stay in the moment? And I'm like, well, what's the moment? And then it's like, well, what if it's a breath? So every time you breathe in and every time you breathe out, that's one moment. And that's how you stay in the moment, is by staying conscious with your breathing. But that means you have these like, how many times do we take a breath per day? I don't know, probably hundreds. There's hundreds of moments every day, and every one of them is born when you breathe in, inspire, which means to give life, and it dies when you exhale, or you expire, which means to die. So like every single moment, every single breath of your day, hundreds of times a day, there's a birth, there's a joy, and there's a life, and then there's a death, and we have to grieve every single one of those moments. Um, and that would be too much to do in real time. You can't be in grief all day. But if you don't make space to process those griefs, those many, many, many griefs, they build up into these huge, awful, suicidal 30 years of grief moments that like what happened to me. So now I don't sit there grieving them every moment of the day, but I do give myself absolute permission to basically have a day, probably at least once a month, maybe twice a month, about a day where I just can't do anything except cry. And that might sound like someone who's struggling with their mental health, but I actually think it's the opposite. I actually think it's someone who's really, really taking care of their mental health and giving themselves that space to breathe and cry and process the trauma of life. Life's traumatic. Um, so, yeah, lots of stuff like that. Like trauma therapy is different. Like I've got friends who've done EMDR. Do you know what that is? Like the,
I've been doing it.
oh, wow, you are one brave human.
So I don't know exactly what it is. I know eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Boo, well done. I couldn't have said that.
It is weird, but it is a way of accessing repressed memories in a safe enough environment
Mm-hmm.
to mean that something about the movement of the eyes means that you can both be in the past and in the present, which is hard because normally if you're having those repressed memories, if something has triggered a repressed memory, which could be a sight, a sound, a smell, a facial expression, then you can have an emotional flashback. So the idea in EMDR, as far as I'm aware, is that you can access those memories. You're guided to access those repressed memories, but are able to interrupt them with this eye movement desensitization reprocessing, to mean that you're able to know that you're not experiencing it again. You're here in this environment in the present day, and you're not back there. That's
Yeah.
as far as I'm aware of.
Yeah, it's like the two different sides of your brain. So when you've been traumatized, you live like we've been talking about the whole way through this chat, is that you live like you're in danger,
Yeah.
and you're terrified to go back to the place or the person or whatever it was that caused the trauma, and that's why you're adrenalized the whole time. So for me, like I've had to go back to the places where my trauma happened, and that's something I've only done recently. Um,
How was that for you? What was that like?
hard, very, very, very hard. But if you can do it, if you can go there and you can take some deep breaths and you can be present with yourself as an adult, um, and you kind of reprogramming your brain that it's now okay, like that is in the past. So what, like the kind of faulty thinking that happens in PTSD is that your brain thinks that the traumatic thing is still happening, and is that is wrong. So to reprogram that, yeah. So EMDR works like that, because you're alternating between your left side of your brain and your right side of your brain. So there's different ways you can do it, like just literally passing a ball between your left and right hands, or anything that stimulates the left and then the right, whilst you kind of safely revisit these memories that were too frightening to think about. But there's also a bunch of stuff I've done in therapy about inner child work. So basically, a lot of traumatized people get stuck at the age they were when the thing happened. So you have this frightened child inside of you, who is terrified. So that's why we act so. Why it's very hard to be adult when we're traumatized, because we're kind
That's
of
very well rephrased.
yeah. So and that's often when we've hurt other people. That's often when we've acted in ways that we're not proud of. And we were.
Like you are telling the story of definitely the last year of my life, if not all of it, sincerely.
I can relate.
uh, Earlier this year, and especially during lockdown just it wasn't just occasionally I'd act in a strange, well, I say strange, act in this flashbacky kind of informed, I'm in danger, and not really understand what's going on. But um, particularly in January this year, something just broke of this danger is
Mm,
ever present and it's not going away, and I don't know what it is, and it must be anyone or anything outside of me, it might be me. And it wasn't until it got to that breaking point of, right, well, we're gonna have to confront this now because there's
mm,
no running away, that I've started to understand what all the layers that were lying underneath that. And you've mentioned the layers of like responsibility of that, fight or flight response, the adrenal glands, the nervous system, the taking responsibility. And yeah, there, you mentioned that you behaved in ways that you regret, that you are grieving that the loss of that period of time as well. How, what I've been struggling with a bit is forgiving yourself, myself, having
mm,
compassion for the younger you that you're reparenting, having that
mm,
kind of,
mm,
that rebuilding the rebuilding of identifying who was hidden underneath the layers of trauma. But then also that's one step. But then there's this next step of having compassion for the you, that more recent you, that perhaps, I mean, I'm still really angry at myself of recent me because of the hurt that she caused.
mm.
um and even as a functional reparenting adult, I'm looking back at her and kind of going, you really disappointed me.
Yeah, but I think that's okay. Like it's really important to like get angry. I think that's one thing that we were unhelpfully taught as kids, which is not to have any negative emotions. Like getting angry is, I mean, everybody knows about the 5 stages of grief. It's like the most cliched thing, but anger is a really really big deal. Like you have to get angry. So getting angry with yourself in a safe way. So like you're talking about reparenting. There's wicked reparenting steps that I keep on my phone here from is it Pete Walker? I think he is.
Pete
Have you
Walker,
heard?
mate, I've totally got his book, From
That's the
Surviving to
guy.
Thriving. I've got
Surviving
that.
to Thriving. He's the guy. So there's these reparenting affirmations that I keep on my phone,
Yes.
that I use to console my own inner child, but also as a parent, to console my actual children. And this has also almost become a kind of manual for parenting for me. So it's like, I'm so glad you were born. You are a good person. I love who you are, and I'm doing my best to always be on your side. But there was one here. Oh yeah, there's one here that I was thinking of about. It is okay for you to be angry, and I won't let you hurt yourself or others when you are. And that one's absolutely key, right? So I use this with myself, and I use this with my children. Like, am I allowed to swear? I don't know.
I mean,
But
yes, absolutely.
I was about to say, fucking get angry. I don't say that to my children, but I do to myself. Like, fucking do it. Like, get angry. Like, find a safe way to be angry, um, because you can't heal if you're holding on to all that energy. It's such toxic energy. And a really, really, really wonderful way to do it is through creativity. So that's why I'm doing this course at the moment called The Artist Way. It's completely changed my world. Again, handed to me by my therapist.
Yeah.
But like one thing my therapist gave me, it was in the summer because I was just starting touring again, and I was having this moment where a bunch of anger had overspilled out of me against my will in a restaurant where they wouldn't let me use the bathroom, and I just got really really upset and angry, and that kind of like non-adult behavior kind of spilled out for the first time in quite a long time.
Well,
And I
just
was
to be
really
clear, what kind of, what was, how was that exhibiting itself, that that anger?
so like so first I tried to just go to the bathroom even though they told me not to. I just wasn't respecting what they were saying. And then I just got really angry with them for ages. I was like, I just spent a load of money in your restaurant. You're not even going to let me use your bathroom. Like, I wasn't listening to them.
Mm.
It's just not like me at all. Normally, I'm like, if you don't want me to use your bathroom, you don't even deserve my urine. Goodbye. Like, I'm not normally someone to just get bogged down in something petty. So this really upset me. I was like, why am I angry with some person I don't even know? And I, took it to my therapist, and like, anger is real. There's a lot that I am actually genuinely angry about that maybe I'm not really giving a space, and then it sort of spills out of me. So this is the thing she handed me, this gift she handed me. She said, is there any way in the next like few days maybe that you could like channel that anger into something creative? And I was like, oh my God, yes, there is. I'm going on stage tomorrow. I'm doing a show, and I'm a beatboxer. And beatboxing, and this is why I love it, like does have an aggression to it. Does like it, even though even though in the show I'm a really gentle and loving human, like there's bits in the show where I get the mic and I just let fucking rip, like bass just comes out of me and it feels so powerful and so incredible. And so I did a show like the next day, and I just let everything that I was furious about come out through this music. And I kind of lost myself for a bit, and I opened my eyes, and the place went mad. The place went mad. Like they were going, yeah. And I'm like, oh my God. So I've just like let all this stuff off my chest, really vented. And other people have benefited from it. Like they like it. And like, wow, what a gift from the therapist.
How does so this is something that I'm questioning at the moment is performing. How does that help and how does that hinder? Because I'm envious of you with the beatboxing, because like
We
that
wouldn't
you
be.
can.
It's okay. I'm envious of you too, though, Juliet Burton.
Well, thank you. And I mean that in a envy as a motivational sometimes, but I what I envy is that with that you identified you were angry, you had a creative outlet that wasn't directly addressing. You weren't standing up on stage and saying, "Hey, I'm angry about this, and this." It was you were channeling that anger into your performance, that then and somehow that deeper emotion connected with the audience, and whatever deep emotions were going on for them. So it made it more like a visceral, present moment for everyone involved, yourself and them. Now,
Mm.
the thing that I'm a bit confused, and this is a personal question.
Mm.
With my shows before, I've often told a narrative for public consumption about difficult experiences, and
Mm.
it's not until this year where I've been like, oh, actually, I feel angry and sad, and I'm grieving, and I was distancing myself from feeling those feelings associated with those difficult experiences
Mm.
by telling a story for other people to consume.
Mm.
That then meant that I was constantly caught up in telling a story rather than feeling and being present with my feelings. So now that I'm doing that, I'm finding the whole like, well, how do we perform? How can I get up on stage and tell stories without distancing me from the experience? And I don't know if you have an answer for that.
But that's the beauty of storytelling. Like, that's the beauty. Like storytelling is a huge creative platform, and like me holding a mic and channeling a load of anger into like vocal beats and bass is storytelling in itself. Like, everything you're doing is storytelling. So, but also for a story to be authentic, it doesn't have to tell every single element. So all my therapist told me to do was, is there a safe way for you to vent your anger using creativity? So I chose beatboxing because I had a show the next day. Whereas if I didn't, I might have journaled it, or I might have written a song, or I might have, I
Drawn
don't know.
charcoal drawings, mate.
Ah, so good. Just to like,
So good.
just to let it out. Like, it's so valid. Dancing is an absolute corker. Go out dancing, or just dance by yourself. Like, bang on some angry, aggressive drum and bass, like whatever. But storytelling, like, this is where I'm at with my show now. Like the story, so the story. I've actually switched quite a lot of facts around, like, because my own journey with like experiencing racism as a small child is really really hard for me to speak about, and I'm not going to do that on stage. So I've actually borrowed stories from my other friends of color who've had experiences and have told me awful things that have happened to them, and I've, with their permission, said, could I adapt your story and put it into mine? So, because it's still, you don't have to tell blow for blow, like, no one wants to hear every single moment of your life, because that would take your whole life to tell again. So it's like the analogy of beatboxing being a vehicle to express anger is exactly the same as a story. So I could tell you a story right now about something that didn't happen as a way to vent anger. So I could say, Juliet, this morning the postman slapped me around the face, and 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 it made me really angry. Um, no, that's something that didn't happen, but it could help me process something that someone else did do to me. You know what I'm saying? That
I do. There's so firstly, I love the fact that you said that, and my light immediately turned back on as if it were a light bulb moment for me. There is so there's a thing in for this Hopepunk project I've been sitting on, which I've been umming and ahhing about, and I think that you've just given me the kind of push I needed of like that is the right way to go.
mm,
Where there's an analogy that I've come up with for something that will represent a lot of things that I'm not willing to talk about on stage, but it can be a representation of
absolutely.
that.
You
And
need
then
to
it
be
can be
safe
represented,
enough.
it's safe enough, and it can represent whatever it represents to other people in the audience as well. If it becomes bigger than the thing itself that was my thing. It becomes everyone's thing of we can all be angry about this or upset yeah, whatever it is. This representation, that's art, right? Like, I mean, I personally, there are other comedians who I've had strong conversations with about whether comedy is art. I strongly think comedy is art. I think it is. I
Of
think
course it
that
is.
it's theatre. Everything we do is theatre. Everything we do is storytelling, as you just said. We're coming to the end of our conversation, and it feels like it's only been 5 minutes. So let's do this again, with or without our Twitch viewers, with or without karaoke machine. With or without swing dancing, with or without David. But so I wanted to ask before we go, because I wanted to ask you about other traumas you've experienced. You mentioned racism. You've mentioned, I mean, I know that we haven't even touched upon gender identity and expressions of gender fluidity. And so there's all of that. If there's anything you want to bring into the conversation about that right now. But the other thing I really wanted to ask was the pandemic. Was it
Mm.
traumatic? And and is there an awakening as a result of that?
Yeah, I think it's been global. I feel like it's been a sort of a global trauma, similar to stuff that our generations above us experienced with holocausts and world wars and going back earlier than that. So these are the kind of things that get passed down generations if they're not really, 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 really carefully dealt with. So that's kind of our generation's responsibility to really, not just be like, oh, I'm glad that's over, pretend it never happened. No, it's our responsibility to show up and process how we really feel about it.
Hmm.
I'm quite scared because this kind of this could easily just be the first of many, and I'm really scared about that. The way that we're as humans treating this planet, zooming around it, spreading infections that might not have even existed if we weren't abusing the way that we handle the planet. Like, it's been a global awakening, but a lot of good has come from it. So yeah, I feel like that's got to be our thing now, is to make sure that we learn from our mistakes, process the trauma, and protect our children and their children and their children's children's children from the end of the world.
So we'll wrap this up with the fact that you and I have both said that we've had breakdowns. I'd say, so I was sectioned when I was 17, and I was suicidal for a long period when I was about 19, and then in my 20s there were multiple suicidal periods. And
Mm.
I'd say that this year would be the breakdown that I was most present for. So
Yeah.
I was like here for it. Like, I was like, I'm not running away from this. This is as much grief as I need to feel this. I'm not willing to push it away anymore, because I'm not going to change if I keep going around in circles and staying the same again
Mm.
and again. I'll keep making the same mistakes. So I'm going to feel this now. I'm going to let this happen, and I'm going to explore it and look into the darkness, rather than constantly being like, oh no, but look, here's some light over here. Let's focus on that. No, let's look at the darkness and
Yeah.
let's see what is there to learn from that. Um, so I'm going to have to ask two very quick questions before we end our chat. Firstly, do we have a better word for breakdown yet?
Well, the other day you described it as was it an RST or something like
An FTS?
that? An
No,
FST.
FST.
Freaking shitty time.
Yeah, I mean, you started off by trying to neaten up the swearing and then realised there was another
Yeah,
swear
there's no one
word
to go with it.
immediately
A freaking
A
seriously
fucking shitty
difficult
time. Fucking shitty time. An
an
FT,
FST. But I
FST,
mean,
FST.
but
Have
why
you
are we? But why are we trying to shy away from the word breakdown? Like, aren't we just adding to the stigma by not just calling it what it is?
Well, that's the thing of breakdown. I hate it's all these stupid platitudes. When I say stupid, because it's the stigma that's stupid. That
What are the connotations of the word breakdown to you?
breakdown to me still feels like, okay, well, they were just a bit weak, they just weren't strong enough. Like, I've had a couple of friends say to me recently, like, take it easy, you've had a tough year, like, your health is the primary concern. And immediately I have that adaptive child voice in my head, going, pretending to be an adult, going, no, I just need to pull up my socks, and I'm making a fuss about
Mm,
nothing, and I can do
mm,
it. I stop making a fuss. I'm just making mountains out of molehills. That might have been a voice that was modeled for me, but I don't have to. That's not actually going to help me. Has it served me in the past? No. But that's where that comes
mm.
from, of breakdown. Breakdowns lead to breakthroughs if you're willing to work through it, which again, that's a platitude, which has been like, people have stigmatized those sorts of, really, those are wise words, but they become coffee mugs and tea towels and
Do you know what I think
Instagram
about
posts.
the word breakdown?
Go on.
Because I come at it from a composer's point of view, like, or a DJ's point of view. You can't have a drop without a build up, and you can't have a build up without a breakdown. Like, it's like waves. The sea comes in and out, and that's constant, and it's like breathing. It's in and out. Break. You can't build up without a breakdown. So it's exhale, expiration. It's dying. It's grieving. It's death. You've got to have a breakdown. You've got to have a breakdown. Anyone who's telling me they've never had a breakdown, yeah, is either lying, or they're due a really, really, really fucking huge one at some point soon, and I'll be there for them when it happens. But it's like breathing. If you don't do it, you're not alive. So I think the word breakdown is a wonderful word.
I'm thinking of a couple of people I know who I don't think they would consider themselves as having had a breakdown, but I think that looking at what's around them and the impact they're having on other people,
I
I think
hear
maybe
you.
maybe they you know what I mean. I also feel, so that's why we're using the emoji. We're using three emojis in Hopepunk research. We're using the fire emoji,
Mm-hmm.
not just because all of my interviewees are fire, but also because I read this thing early on in the summer, which was, you've got sometimes a forest has to have a fire to burn the whole forest down to mean that there's regrowth.
Mm-hmm.
The next emoji is a crescent moon, so mainly shadow on the moon, but that sliver of light reminding us actually the whole moon's there. It's just, what is it reflecting right now?
Oh, you're making my skin stand on end.
Oh, cool. I'm glad the emojis are doing the writing for me at the
Always.
moment. And then the final one is a sunflower, because sunflowers, they're tiny little seeds that then can grow if you nurture them, and they will always face towards the sun. So, Shlo, thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad that we've had this breakdown together, because we've broken it down. We've broken down some big topics, and we've had a moment of pause, a moment to reflect. We've had our lovely viewers watching us, and hopefully people in the future will be watching this on on the future, on YouTube, on Twitch. It'll stay up for a little while
On the
longer.
replay.
Baldy3 says this sounds like the start of a karaoke playlist. Fire, Whole of the Moon. Yes. Okay.
That's what
Okay.
you need,
Right.
a Hopepunk karaoke playlist.
What's going to happen with the sunflower? Here Comes the Sun by the
Here comes
Beatles.
the sunflower.
Yeah, done, sorted. Right, that's my pre-show playlist. I'm gonna have those songs
What,
on my pre-show
maybe
playlist.
they're the song
Ah,
titles for a soundtrack to Hopepunk the show.
that's how I start writing my shows. I always create a playlist that I listen to whilst I'm writing the show, and that's just on loop. And then I pick my favorites and I put them into a mashup that go into my pre-show playlist. So if you come to my shows, then if you come early, sit and listen to what's being played, because that's what I was listening to when I was in the writing process.
It's exactly the same as me, apart from that I do exactly that, get the playlist, but then I just write new music inspired by all of that other stuff that goes into the whole thing. So yeah,
Oh,
that's
dude, I wish I could afford you to come and write some new music for me, but we've
I
had
would
you as
love
an
to do that.
interview. I mean, I would love it too. I mean, we should do that whole, like, we're going to do a swing mashup with beatboxing and Whitney Houston thrown in as well. Like, all of that is going to happen at some point. I'm not sure, but I want to make it happen. Arts Council, if you watch these videos back, this is going to be a big moment, okay? Like, we're going to get Shlo and me creating some new genre of music, and David from the swing dance community as well.
Love it.
Shlo, I can't thank you enough for your time.
Thanks for
So
having me.
I won't thank you at all. I
Oh,
can't thank you enough, so I won't thank you at all. No, I'm really, really grateful for your time. And yeah, I'll see you on WhatsApp to figure out when we're going to go dancing and karaokeing soon. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Our next interview is next week on Monday. I'm talking to, have you heard of Johnny Benjamin, Shlo?
I know Johnny very well. He's been on my show. He's a lovely and very articulate human. So you'll
He's a
have a great time.
beautiful, beautiful soul. So I'm going to be speaking to him at 9:30 a.m. for all you early birds on Monday next week. And then on Tuesday, I'm talking to neuroscientist and comedian Dean Burnett. So I'm going to learn so much next week. It's
You're
going
on
to be,
fire.
I'm on fire. Right. Thank you so much, gang. You are all Hope Punks. Do join our Discord and follow Shlo on all of the socials. They've been appearing in the chat during this chat. So thanks, Shlo. See you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.